Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, obviously, this is a story from the Bible. Okay, you may be familiar with it. And ultimately, if you look around, you're going to find a thousand interpretations about what this story means. And this is just my interpretation, right? But I actually haven't seen this interpretation anywhere, so maybe it's worth listening to. So, if we were to interpret this story, okay, and I'm not going to read the exact passage, but I'll kind of summarize it. So, in the story, God tells Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so what does this mean? Is God telling Adam and Eve not to eat from trees, like literal trees that grow good and evil? I don't think so, right? Because I have yet to find a tree that grows good and evil on it. Okay? Trees grow flowers, they grow fruit, they grow nuts, but they don't grow good and evil. So, what is God trying to say? Well, again, God tells us not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, what does knowledge mean in this context? Well, knowledge kind of implies dogma, right? Or it implies knowing. It implies a deep belief in or a deep faith in something that you know, right? So when we are dogmatic about something, we have knowledge about it. Whether it's true or not objectively, we have knowledge about it. So when we come to have knowledge of good and evil, when we eat from the tree of good and evil, or when we choose to know or choose to believe in good and evil, what that means is that we're participating in moral dogmatism, okay? So in other words, to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is to choose to know good from evil, okay? It's a pretty straightforward metaphor when you really break it down. It's actually pretty simple. It's not too complicated. I'm not stretching things too far here. Okay? So when you eat, you choose, okay? To eat is to choose. To eat from a tree of knowledge is to choose to know, and to eat from a tree of knowledge of good and evil is to choose to know good from evil. And this makes sense, right? Because again, good and evil don't grow on trees. Good and evil grow in human minds. They are human constructs. They're human creations. If you ask a dog whether Iran is good or evil, the dog's gonna look at you like, let's go on a walk, right? The dog doesn't know good from evil. The dog has kind of these basic fight or flight defense mechanisms, right? So if an Iranian comes in and attacks the dog's gonna run or it's gonna bite, but the dog doesn't declare in a sophisticated manner that the country of Iran is evil, as it seems the United States government is doing right now. So what it means to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is to participate in moral dogmatism. What it means is to define or declare good from evil. So if we go back to Genesis, when God creates the heavens and the earth in 7 days or whatever, God says he created light, and he says that the light was good. But what God didn't say is that the darkness was bad, okay? This is an important insight. So God said the light was good. God did not say that darkness was bad. God did not declare the light as good. God declared the light as good, but God did not declare darkness as bad. This is important to understand, because what happens when we declare something as evil or someone as evil? Well, what's going to happen is you're going to defend yourself somehow, okay? And defense mechanisms vary widely. But what might happen, as with this Iran-US example, is that when you declare some foreign nation as evil, or some foreign government, you're going to defend yourself. And defense mechanisms turn oftentimes into offensive mechanisms. And just like that, you're dropping bombs in Iran, or you're funding Israel's ability to drop bombs in Iran, right? So how does Iran respond to this? Iran responds by closing the Strait of Hormuz, right? They respond with more defense mechanisms, which ultimately turn into offensive mechanisms. So just like that, our prices of gasoline are going up, and it's causing a bunch of pain in our own economy, in our domestic economy, right? So it's very easy to see that when we choose as a human collective, not as the United States or as Iran, when humans choose as a whole to believe that each other are evil, or that something else in the world is evil, what's going to happen is we are going to turn against each other, and we're going to create these vicious cycles of mutually assured destruction, right? And ultimately, in the story, what God does is God punishes Adam, Eve, and the serpent, okay? So the serpent ultimately fools Eve into eating from the tree, and Eve fools Adam into eating from the tree, and then God punishes them for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And we look at this punishment as if God is some separate entity or separate being who is watching over us, judging us, and punishing us accordingly. That's not what's going on here. What's really happening is that God is us, okay? God is, the punishment that God inflicts on us is the mutually assured destruction. It is the vicious cycle of mutually assured destruction that comes in the form of war, right? Or famine, or higher gas prices. So when two countries label each other as evil, they attack each other, or they defend themselves from each other. And that's what creates the mutually assured destruction. And that mutually assured destruction is the punishment. Again, forget this idea that God is some separate entity watching over you. God is freedom. God is pure love. And again, love and freedom are synonymous in this sense. So when you stray away from pure freedom by controlling some other nation, you are straying away from love, okay? And you're straying away from God. And that's when God punishes you. But again, this isn't God punishing you. It is you punishing yourself through your own actions, through your belief in evil, okay? So we have to understand that God, or the Bible, the story of the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, includes the serpent and God for a reason, okay? And this is important to understand. There's a reason why the serpent is in the story, okay? And it's not to represent some evil or some satanic figure. The serpent offers up an opportunity for a lesson, okay? And here's what the lesson is. When God tells you not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as a child, you can't know what that means. So what does the serpent do? Well, the serpent tempts you. The serpent tells you, eat from this tree. Go out in the world and see what it feels like, or see what happens when you believe in evil. See what happens when you project power or control over something or someone that you consider evil. And watch as that thing responds in kind, okay? Watch as that thing returns the pain that you inflicted on it back onto you. In other words, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is essentially sitting in the middle of the Garden of Eden, right? And God puts up red tape around it, right? Caution tape. Don't eat from this tree. But that caution tape is invisible to the person who has not been tempted by the serpent. So the serpent brings the opportunity for a lesson. You go out in the world, you inflict pain on people, and you learn the lesson. And after you learn that lesson, you now adopt the godly perspective. You say, okay, the knowledge of good and evil is, rather, when I declare good from evil, when I label things as evil, I bring evil on myself, right? You cannot see the red tape until you learn the lesson. You cannot see that red tape around the tree. You can't even identify that it was wrong or stupid or foolish to declare good from evil until you suffer from the pain that other people inflict back on you, right? So there's a reason, again, that the whole story includes the serpent and God. If the lesson was simply not to declare good from evil, then why did they include the serpent in the story? Well, they include the serpent because you can't know that lesson until you make the mistake. You can't learn until you make the mistake. So the serpent is an opportunity, okay? The serpent is not a satanic figure. The serpent is a teacher, right? It's an opportunity for a lesson. And that lesson is ultimately this. What I can, in a psychological sense, I can break this down separate from the kind of biblical context. If you look at judgments you make in the world, you can separate those judgments into two categories, okay? You can say, this judgment has a moral context to it, or it has a moral implication, and this judgment does not have a moral implication. So in other words, there are moral judgments which imply good and evil, and there are non-moral judgments which don't imply good and evil. So I can go out and say, wow, this guy's really good at guitar. He's a lot better than me at guitar. And that creates this hierarchy, right? So we have people on a scale. On one end of the scale, people are really good at guitar. On the other end of the scale, people have never played guitar, right? We can identify, or we can declare or know that this person's really good at guitar, that this person's better at guitar than I am. But when we assign moral valuations or moral worth or worthiness to that scale or that spectrum because somebody's good at guitar or better at guitar than this other person, that is what we want to stay away from. And again, like I said, you're not going to know to stay away from this until you feel that mutually assured destruction, until you learn that lesson. So if you're out there and you believe in evil and you're labeling things as evil because they're a threat to you, keep on doing it. I'm not kidding. Keep on doing it. I'm the serpent in this case. Keep on labeling things as evil until you become aware of how your labels create or bring destruction on yourself. Okay, so another example. Let's say that you label somebody as obese, right? They're fat, okay? Simple. They are overweight, and you say being overweight is unhealthy. What I have stated there is a fact. It is a judgment. But I have not attached a moral declaration. I have not said that this person is evil because they are fat. I've just said they're fat. And that being fat typically leads to a shorter lifespan, right? That it's unhealthy. We have to make distinctions between these moral judgments and non-moral judgments. And that's ultimately why God in the Bible says you can eat from any tree except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In other words, you can make judgments about anything except judgments that declare good from evil. And again, remember, when God created the heavens and the earth, he said he created light, and he said light was good. That was to imply that everything is good. Everything is an opportunity for a lesson when you change the perspective, when you change how you look at the world. Okay? So think about those two different types of judgments. Judgments that imply moral valuations and judgments that don't imply moral valuations. And this will help separate what you see as evil from good, and it will help separate that good from evil. It will help separate good from evil, and it will help separate people who are trying to help you, right? So when someone calls you fat or tells you you might want to lose some weight, they're not necessarily making a moral judgment on you. And this can go for anything, okay? When someone says, you would be better off getting a better job, it's not them judging you for the job you're doing. It's them saying that, try this, consider this possibility. When someone tells you that you should eat less meat, it's not them judging you necessarily. It's saying that maybe you eat less meat, you'll feel better because plant-based diets are associated with these certain health outcomes, right? And I could come up with a million examples here. The point here is that be careful when you make moral judgments. Pay attention to the consequences of the moral judgments you make. But if you don't understand that declaring evil is bringing evil on you, then keep declaring evil, right? I'm the serpent again in this case. I'm tempting you to do bad things to other people or to declare good from evil until you realize that declaration is created in your own head. And ultimately, when you create that declaration, when you judge good from evil, you create the capacity for suffering, okay? Suffering comes from expectations, and expectations of evil is the root of all suffering. Okay, you can look at a list of problems in the world as pure evil, or you can look at a list of problems in the world as the first step in solving those problems. So, thanks for watching.